Hello, my name is Bjorn Hansen and I head the European Chemicals Agency. My keynote lecture today is about our view in ECHA about how REACH and CLP are working. But first, let me, of course, as always, thank the organizers for inviting me to give this lecture or this speech to you. And let me frame what I'll be talking about a little bit. Because once you talk about or ask the question, is REACH and CLP working? Then you need to define what do you mean with working before I can really answer the question. And when I look, and we at ECHA look at that question, then the way we answer it is to look at the scientific and technical aspects of the workings of REACH and CLP and answer the question whether we think that the workings of REACH and CLP are achieving the outputs which reach the objectives originally set by REACH and CLP. We're at the moment finishing our so-called 5-year report on the working of REACH and CLP, and what you'll basically be seeing in this talk is a sneak preview of our findings. Of course, also over the last year, a lot of policy has developed, both in terms of the whole European Green Deal, but also in the context of the chemical strategy, which basically says that the objectives of chemicals legislation is a moving target, and the aspirations are being set at the moment. And the way the Commission is looking at it through their chemical strategy is setting even higher objectives than those set originally in REACH. And when I go through the workings of how we see things are going, I'll try to talk about both the angle of the original objectives of REACH and then some of the reflections that we have in ECHA and that I have on how this looks from the perspective of the objectives set in the chemical strategy and in the bigger context of the European Green Deal. If we start at the beginning of REACH, meaning R in REACH, registration, then behind registration is the whole own responsibility on industry through the supply chain of self-regulating their own chemicals, and then the documentation of what they're doing in the registration. And I think looking at registration, overall, industry has made enormous efforts in complying with REACH, in carrying out their registration, generating new information, putting it into their safety data sheets, and improving risk management overall. But the question or the issue that we need to look at when answering the question, is it all working, is of course, are we as far as we would have expected back then to be now? And I think there the answer is no. That industry has made huge efforts, but looking at the expectations back then, we still got quite a ways to go. This is in the supply chain in particular, where communication is not as smooth as we had wanted by this point in time. And there's a number of obstacles to that smooth communication. One is simple, efficient tools, meaning standardization, harmonization, and digitalization of the whole communication, which is not functioning to the level that we think could be done and should be done in order to ensure all the information is used for safety. And the other thing that is hampering the implementation in the supply chain of companies is clearly the interaction between REACH and other legislation. Until there is a seamless implementation of the obligations, for example, in the workplace, coming from employment legislation, from worker protection legislation, and REACH and CLP, there will be inefficiencies in the system, and inefficiencies, of course, lead to less protection. So those are the two bigger things that we see in ECHA are hampering the actual achieving of the objectives of REACH in terms of supply chain communication and safety at work, but also the environment and consumers. But Nevertheless, huge efforts have been made with big leaps forward in protection. So this is not a message that things are not going well at all. It is things are going well in the right direction, but there's a lot still to be done. The machinery of registration has worked very well. This is something we're very happy and very proud of ourselves in ECHA, that we've managed to contribute to that success, but also the enormous efforts that industry has put in order to digitalize and get their safety systems to interface with the whole REACH registration requirements. Move to the E in REACH, evaluation. Basically, overall, we feel evaluation is working reasonably well. Looking at testing proposal and compliance check, we've made big steps forward in making these processes not only achieving the objectives, but also much more efficient. In the last years, we've almost doubled the amount of compliance checks that we make at ECHA, and the testing proposal mechanism is being used more and more by industry as a vehicle to address data generation for groups of substances, which is definitely the most efficient way of doing it and not doing it through compliance check. Substance evaluation, on the other hand, we feel is not working very well. The system is very slow. Very often we don't conclude that there is a concern, meaning the substance we looked at was not the right substance. Quite some of the hazard data could be generated through compliance check rather than through substance evaluation, where compliance check is much more efficient. And finally, we see that the resources in member states for substance evaluation are not sufficient to make it a fast and efficient process, and that not always the right resources are involved. Just to exemplify, ultimately, substance evaluation is a legally sound decision that has to hold up in court. So obviously, lawyers need to be involved in the drafting. Best of all is to have them draft to start out with, and that we don't see very often happening. Moving on to the risk management parts of REACH, we feel that restrictions has definitely been moving in the right direction. We've been able to ourselves in ECHA develop dossiers much more efficiently, focusing much more on the science needed to justify a decision at the union level of the Commission, rather than collect lots of science and then figure out what science is needed to support a decision. So it's become more impactful restrictions. We've looked much more at groups of substances, much broader uses, and used information that's already been assessed by other organizations. We've been using that much more systematically in our work. So I'd say on the REACH restriction side, we've continuously improved, and now we're reaching the level that we can look at groups of substances. We can be a lot more categoric, a lot more generic, without any reduction in the science that's backing the restriction itself. On the authorization system side, however, there we feel also there's quite a lot of improvement needed. It's a bit of a double act. On the one hand, we do see that the system as such is contributing to meeting the objectives of REACH. We do see a reduction in risk. We do see substitution of substances just from the fact that they enter the candidate list to the fact that they are in Annex 14. And you see that then in the applications for authorization and in the review of applications, which we've just started. So the whole system does promote safety and definitely does promote substitution. But we at ECHA, we think that it's rather inefficient and that a lot needs to be done in order to create efficiencies. What do we mean with that? Well, it's basically that the authorization system has become, or is at the moment, a system which is effectively site permitting. And that level of detail is very inefficient in terms of achieving the objectives of substitution and safety. The other hindrance in the authorization system is the incentives of gathering and getting knowledge on alternatives and bringing it in a timely fashion into the process to make full informed opinions at ECHA. So we see some major design problems in the authorization side, although authorization as a system is contributing to meeting the objectives. So that's a sneak preview of how we see much of REACH working. Overall, we feel in the current, in relationship to the objectives that were originally set, that many bits of REACH are working. We see bits that need significant improvement or which are rather inefficient. If we then move to looking at the chemical strategy and the new objectives that are being set, then we also see that, for example, the issue of grouping is something that we have been doing under REACH and which we have in ECHA set as the backbone of all our work. Our own work on grouping has been accelerating, and we see basically that the ability to assess chemicals faster and faster is something we have built up and we are doing, improving. And therefore we feel that that competence and that work that we've been doing in REACH itself is getting ourselves ready for meeting challenges in the chemical strategy, where the desire to work much more with groups is also being emphasized. We see that also in the restrictions, where we've tried from our side in ECHA in preparing proposals, restrictions proposals, to work a lot more with grouping, that also has been working successfully, and we've been able to deliver opinions which the legislators have been able to use to put the restrictions into place that are needed to protect the European citizen and the environment. Other elements of the chemical strategy where we think that there's definitely something we have that we can contribute to is the whole issue of critical use, where we believe that we've actually been gaining a lot of concrete on-the-ground experience in restrictions and authorization in order to understand better what the policymaker sees as a critical use of a substance versus a use which is not critical. And that, we think, can be harvested, that knowledge and understanding, in order to further the debate, which obviously is a policy debate on critical uses, but from our side, we can substantiate what are the elements that we can contribute to in that debate. So those are some highlights in terms of what we've done in the last 5 years in ECHA with the member states, with industry, with all the stakeholder organizations, and with the Commission in contributing, in carrying out our tasks to the implementation of these instruments. And we feel overall a lot of progress has been made. A lot needs to be done, and in particular with the new higher ambition set out in the chemical strategy, there even more has to be done. But overall, we believe that collectively, with all our partners around, we're in a pretty good state to take on those additional new challenges that are there. With that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy to observe throughout this the Chemicals Forum and participate where possible in discussions. Bye-bye.